Welcome to the Domain Name Wire podcast. I'm your host, Andrew Alleman, and this is episode number 580. On today's show, my guest is Adam CEO Darpan Munjal. Now, Adam is known for testing lots of things, trying new things, seeing if they work. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. On today's show, Darpan is going to talk about some of the things the company is trying and what the results have been so far. You'll also hear about Adam's new registrar, and you'll learn what percentage of the company's domain sales revenue now comes from .ai domains. It's a shocking number. You'll also hear how allowing payment plans increases sales and how the company's new certified offers are performing. So stay tuned for that. First, a word from our sponsor. Our sponsor this week is Salve.com and its for sale landing pages. You can save money by selling your domains through Salve. Pay just a 4% commission when your domains sell. If your domains are at Salve, they transfer instantly. Otherwise, there's a quick and easy transfer process. They have fast payouts. In fact, if you sell a lot of domains with Salve, they'll even offer you instant payouts. Learn more and start selling your domains through Salve Landers. Go to salve.com/DNW/sell. That's SAV.com/DNW/sell. Let's run through some news in the domain business from the past week before we chat with Darpan. First, Sedo has a new CEO as the company goes through the sales process. Arthur Mai, a managing director for the company and the CMO of the parent company, Ionos, is now the CEO. He replaces Michael Robrock, who was the CEO for the past 5 years. Ionos hopes to sell the Sedo business by the end of Q3. Speaking of Sedo, the company teamed up with sister company InternetX to deliver this year's global domain report. Some of the data in the report includes that 76% of Sedo sales last year were buy now transactions. Only 8% of sales were negotiated sales from domains with a make offer setting. So one takeaway from this is pricing your domains helps them sell better. A court has allowed discovery into cases in which GoDaddy has clawed back an auction win due to errors. The decision comes in a lawsuit that two companies filed against GoDaddy after domains they bought, Color.com and Butane.com, were clawed back by the company about 2 months after they bought them and after they had started making plans to use the names. GoDaddy will have to turn over data on clawbacks due to, quote, unexpected errors for the last 18 months. As well as identify all lawsuits, arbitrations, or administrative proceedings during the past 2 years involving disputes over post-auction reversals or cancellations. Well, a tiny island territory has relaunched its top-level domain, .pn. The Pitcairn Islands have just 35 full-time residents, but you don't need a big territory to have a top-level domain. For a long time, you could register .pn domains, but it was a manual process. Now they have a modern registry infrastructure, and anyone can go register a domain for about $129. With help from registrar Incirca, the registry says that PN can stand for a lot of things, mostly around AI and blockchain technology. There are some existing registrants on .pn who went through the manual process, including ESPN, which registered es.pn. More news at domainnamewire.com, but now let's chat with Darpan. My guest this week is Darpan Munjal. He is the CEO of Adam. Darpan, welcome back to the show.
Hey, Andrew. Always good to be back on.
So set the stage for me. How big is Adam now?
In our premium section, which is the curated marketplace, we have about 400,000 names now. And in total, we have over 6 million names at this point, which is primarily the standard and the plus listings that are over and above the premium collection.
All right. So the premium model is kind of you submit a domain, you get approved, it goes into the marketplace, higher commission, more promotion. And then you've got the standard and plus. The standard is basically a landing page service with transactions, as well as you can show up, of course, in search results, but a lot less exposure. And then plus is kind of right in the middle, correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, all listings are searchable, but the extent to which they are discoverable definitely is different. So if somebody's looking for a broad term like clothing or fashion, it's unlikely a very specific standard listing may show up. But if somebody's searching for a very specific name, and if there are standard or plus listings that are closer to those search terms, then they will definitely show up.
Okay, got it. And as far as revenue, as far as domain sales are concerned, What's kind of a breakdown, a high level for top level domains?
Yeah, so this number has been definitely changing over the years. At this point, we get about 36% of our revenue from domains that are not .com, and then the rest is .com. And then within that, obviously .ai makes up most of that. So 25% of our total revenue at this point is .ai.
Oh, 25% of the total revenue. So if I'm looking at non-com, non-AI, we're looking at like 11% of sales revenue?
Yeah, correct. Yes.
Actually, now that I think about it, that's not terribly surprising. I assume if we go back a few years, IO was probably a bigger piece of it, and then AI came up from there.
Yeah, IO used to be quite popular, and there was a period where that popularity dropped quite significantly. However, last 6 to 9 months, there seems to be an increased demand for .io domains. And that could be maybe because the .ais are not as affordable as they used to be, or they're all taken. So many tech entrepreneurs seem to be more open to the idea of going with a .io, a strong one-word kind of name, than at least several months ago.
Yeah, the .com's $1 million and the .ai is 200,000, and you can get the .io for maybe 20,000. That might be your answer right there.
It's quite surprising. There used to be this multiplier like 4 to 5x between .ai and .com, but at the 5-figure range, that multiplier is actually not that big anymore. There are many .ai sales that we've had where the .com is not priced terribly too high compared to the .ai price. So seems like that price parity, at least at the 4 to 5-figure range, is not as big as it used to be in the past.
Yeah, that makes sense. And, one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you today is because you are constantly tinkering with ways to improve our domain name sales, domain investors, domain sales, new features. You're not afraid to try things, see if they work, and then go from there. And one of the things that has become very popular in the domain business are payment plans, right? So lease to own if you want. But Adam has kind of a twist on that with the down payments as well. So talk to me about the evolution of payment plans and how big of a deal that is now so that sellers can understand.
Yeah, payment plans, have always been a strong aspect of, our platform, as well as we talk to buyers. Many buyers want to stretch out their payments over a period of time, purely from a risk management perspective, affordability, many reasons. Until about last year, we had about 25% of our total sales that came through payment plans. That number has actually gone up in 2026. Just looking at the first quarter, that number is somewhere around 36%. So it's gone up from like 24 to 36%. It could be the economy, it could be the uncertainty with the war and everything else that's going on, but many more buyers are now looking for not being able to pay up front, but they still want these high quality names. So they're trying to they're willing to put down payments, they're willing to pay even a slightly higher premium, but many of them seem to be open to the idea of buying through a payment plan than a bin.
Is the average price of domains that sell with a payment plan higher than others that are just paid cash up front?
Yeah, that's actually a very good question. So we've been, looking at this. It used to be that the average price was more or less in line with what they would have bought. We compare our bin price sales, what's the average on those versus payments sales that are on LTO. For this quarter, the numbers that we have, so the average bin price at this point is about 7,300 for a bin outright sale. For LTO, that number is 11.5. So it's quite a bit of a gap, especially since these are averages, include hundreds and thousands of sales. So I think there's definitely buyers seem to be, so it's not about buyers want to pay less or they want to spend less. It's more about they just want to be able to afford better quality names using these payment plans.
Sure.
So that's
if I'm an entrepreneur and I can pay a monthly fee over 2 months for a name, I guess it does two things for me. One, I can spend more of the cash I have available on other things like marketing development. But also, if it doesn't work out, I do have an option, of course, of canceling. And I'm curious, you've given data in the past that kind of suggested the sweet spot was maybe up to 24 months, and then the cancellation rate goes up quite a bit after that. Is that still what you're seeing?
Yeah, we haven't looked at that cancellation rate specifically in comparing, different terms. That number traditionally has been pretty valid, that beyond 24 months, there is really no difference per se in the actual conversion rate, but at the same time, the default rate does go up. So I don't recommend offering 36 months as a default. I mean, obviously, in negotiations, that can be a good tool to use when somebody's trying to negotiate the price down. Offering a higher payment plan can help. One thing that is interesting is, we offer these down payments, and basically what that means is buyers can pay, or sellers can ask for a certain portion of that domain price to be paid up front in that, along with the first payment. 54% of our payment plans now include a down payment, some sort of down payment, whether it's 10% or 15%. And one thing that we have been, tracking pretty closely is what happens if there was a down payment. Did that lead to a more committed buyer? And what we find is there is about a 19% reduction in the default rates whenever there was a down payment involved with the purchase.
Okay. Yeah, I'm trying to think if that surprises me on the low end or the high end. And I guess it would depend a little bit on the down payment, right? If it's equivalent to 1 month, like I have an LTO or a payment plan going on with one domain, and I think it was probably like a 2-month down payment, if you will. It was the equivalent of 2 months of payment. So plus the first month, right? So they put 3 out of, I don't know, maybe it's an 18, 24 month. I've forgotten. That to me as a seller, first of all, felt great, right? Because I felt like they were pot committed for this name. They were going to do something with it. But then, and Elliot Silver also wrote recently on Domain Investing about selling a .ai domain that was canceled after the first month. And he was thankful that there was a down payment on that one. So clearly it can still happen, but you're saying it reduces it by, I guess 19% lower default rate. What do you think about that? Do you think that's substantial?
I look at it two different ways. One is anything that can help us reduce the default rates is a good thing, right? I mean, that in any case, we want less and less default to happen when there is a payment plan. But on the other hand, even if there is a default, you would always want to be in a position where you have at least recouped, hopefully, your initial investment into the domain. So the domain kind of, whatever you received as part of the payments, you already kind of recovered what you had originally invested. So everything else beyond that is a profit. So what the down payment does is, even if there is a default, you are still able to get a higher portion of that value back, especially in the first payment. So usually what we find is within the first or second installment, most people have already kind of recovered the cost. So the down payment helps in that regard as well.
Do you think, though, that it results in fewer sales? Like it takes some of the edge off when people have to make that bigger upfront payment? And of course, it adds some kind of friction. I wouldn't call it confusion, but kind of another level to the transaction as opposed to, okay, I just have to pay $300 a month for 24 months.
It's definitely a good point. Here's what we find, and we do many, many negotiations every day. In fact, many of those negotiations are for domains where only the bin price is listed. There is no option for buyers to make an offer, but they still reach out to us via chat or phone or email asking how can we kind of help them with the purchase. So what we typically see is if somebody finds a down payment to be an issue, they will typically just reach out to us and they'll say, hey, can you do something about this? Oftentimes we reach back out to the seller, and sellers typically okay with either reducing it or giving them some other incentive. So I don't particularly see this. It can feel like there could be a friction here, but based on the data we are seeing, we don't necessarily see a lower sell-through rate or a conversion drop because of down payments. On the other hand, it does lead to a better, lesser cancellation rate. So I think overall it's a win-win for everyone.
That makes sense. I think a key to that is that it's easy to get in touch with you to ask about negotiating that, right? Which you guys have the chat and all those options when someone's trying to negotiate. I mean, how big of you said you do a lot of negotiations. I mean, how big is negotiation in terms of sales compared to just the buy it now, right? Because I see on other marketplaces, it's like vast majority are buy now transactions now. Is that the case with Adam?
I think about 65% of our transactions would be a pure buy it now. However, there is, even in those 65%, there is often quite a bit of inbound that comes in. So oftentimes buyer would simply chat with us. Some just have general questions about transferring and things like that, but many of them still want to see if a better price might be available. Oftentimes, we may go back and say, no, that's the best we can offer. So there is still quite a bit of back and forth that happens even in those bin price sales. And you're right, the fact that it's easy for buyers to connect with us. We have a 24/7 chat. Our typical response rate is less than 60 seconds on most of these inbound interactions. That allows for a lot more of these conversations to be had. But at the same time, it does help us close more of these sales because we are constantly helping the buyers navigate through the whole purchase process.
Right. Yeah, and I think sometimes we need to remember that oftentimes this is the first time someone's bought a domain name, or at least bought a domain name for more than the standard $10, $20, right? And so they want to make sure that they know what they're doing, that they're going to get the domain name and that sort of thing. And although Atom is a household brand in our industry, most people who come to buy a domain probably haven't heard of it before, I would suspect.
Yeah, I think many of them are first-time domain buyers. So to your point, for many of them, even buying a domain itself they're unsure about the whole process. Are they buying a domain, a website? So many of them have questions that we would expect people to kind of get or understand, but a lot of these people are first-time buyers. So we just need to make sure that we are educating them throughout the process.
Yeah, and thinking about, we talked about things to make sure, like on a payment plan, that they don't default. One other thing that is frustrating as a domain seller is someone will make an offer on a domain. Either I provide then a price or a counter and I don't hear back from them at all, or we actually agree to a price and they don't complete the transaction. That's the most frustrating, right? Because you think you have a sale. You pitched this idea of committed offers a while back, and this was the idea that people could, when they made an offer, put some money down, just a refundable amount, but put some money down just to show that they're serious. How is this going so far?
Yeah, it's something, just like how we like to experiment different things. This was more of an experiment to see what will this do. So the way it works is when somebody makes an offer, they can obviously put in the amount above the minimum offer amount that we allow. And after they made the offer, we give them the option to convert that to what's called a committed offer, which means that they can put a small deposit, let's say like $100 or $200 as part of the offer. And then the seller sees that the buyer has actually made a deposit, and the deposit is technically refundable unless the seller accepts the offer. At that point, the deposit becomes non-refundable and gets applied to the actual purchase price. One issue, and one reason we added this was we see quite a bit of cases where the seller is willing to accept that first offer that the buyer makes, and oftentimes when they do that, the buyer then gets a cold feet. Oh, maybe I offered too much, or maybe I need to go back and think about more negotiation. So then they will go back and say, no, actually, I could only afford $2,000 even though I made an offer for $3,000. So it kind of leads to that situation where some of these deals end up getting lost because the seller was eager to accept, and the buyer, based on that, decided that may not.
Yeah, I can see that. For
so
sure.
This kind of eliminates that type of risk because now the seller can, if they see a deposit, then there is much lower likelihood of the buyer backing out because now there is a skin in the game. And what we see so far, the way we have implemented, this is an optional add-on step, so it doesn't really change the original flow. So we're not seeing a whole lot of buyers who are paying this deposit upfront. We're seeing about 15 to 18% buyers who do put in a deposit.
That's actually, again, it's all perspective. I'm like, yeah, actually, that's not too bad, especially since you can make the offer before going to that extra step with the committed
Exactly.
offer.
And the most interesting thing we are seeing is every single buyer who has made that deposit, that has led to a 100% close rate, which is...
So just to clarify, are you saying that if then the buyer and seller come to an agreement, it's 100% closure? Or are you saying that they're always coming to an agreement?
There is always, once a deposit has been made, so far we have not seen a situation where an agreement was not made.
Oh, interesting. Are we talking... Well, that's actually a pretty substantial number doing a deposit. Are we talking like dozens? Are we talking in the hundreds at this point?
It's still fairly new. I would say it's probably in maybe 100, or we don't have a lot of data here because it's literally a couple of weeks before we...
Yeah, but that's a pretty strong indicator, I think, to begin with.
Right.
Sure.
And we're also using that. One thing that we also have available now is even if the buyer didn't make that initial deposit, during a negotiation, a seller can also request that from the buyer. So in the self-negotiation, the seller can say, hey, I just want to make sure that this is a serious inquiry. So in order for that, here is a link to make that upfront deposit, and then we can re-engage on the discussion kind of thing. So that's another.
Would you suggest doing that after receiving the initial inquiry or maybe after you've negotiated?
I think it's the best moment, at least because we are using that tool as well for Adam-led negotiations sometimes. And what we find is the best time to do that is where you've already had some back and forth. The buyer made an offer, the seller came back with slightly higher amount, the buyer went back and again came back with a counter, and now they're kind of getting closer to that price that would work. But now before the seller finally accepts, they just want the buyer to actually commit because they don't want to be a situation where after all this back and forth, they accept and then the buyer they say, oh,
again, that's the worst. You've wasted your time and you got your hopes
exactly.
up. Right. Yeah. So another test that you've done is adding comparable sales on landing pages. And this is pretty controversial. I know some people are like, ooh, I don't like that at all. So tell me the thinking here and what you're doing to protect domain sellers. I think the fear is that, I price my domain at 10,000 and the comps come up like 3,000, something like that.
Yes. So just to recap on the landers, and this is an optional feature, sellers can opt in or not.
Okay. Oh, you have to opt in?
Yes, correct. So if the sellers are opted in, their landers will start showing a link for buyers to see comparable sales. And we built a lot of AI-based technology on the back end to find very similar domains, not only through Atom, but also through NameBio. And the one thing we are doing is absolutely, that's a valid concern. If somebody's looking at a domain that's been priced at $100,000, if we start showing sales for $3,000, that absolutely is not going to help. So this technology shows names that are either within that ballpark of what the current listed price is or higher. So it's not just a random list of the whole spectrum of sales that happen about names that are close to that. It's names that sold within that ballpark, less than within the 90% of the selling price or higher. So it kind of showcases a collection of names to make this pricing a bit more real, because that's one of the friction points for most buyers is they don't know whether they can trust the pricing. Is this the right price? Is it the best I should be paying? And if they see now, here are the 10 sales that happened with a clear source and a date and a price point that's within very similar to what they're looking to pay or even higher, that gives them much more confidence that yes, this makes sense to go forward with. It's still early. We don't have, something we are testing very closely, and we'll see what that does to the sell-through rates and such. So far, it seems to at least demonstrate that for the domains that have this comparable feature, we are seeing less negotiations requests. At least anecdotally seems to be leading to better close rates, but it's too early. I think we need to still get more data and see if this is going to lead to something meaningful.
Are you doing other things to kind of tinker with the landing pages and that sort of thing to see if it results in more sales?
Yeah, we keep testing, quite a few things. There's a badge we added recently for instant transfers. And this is something that basically is for domains that are already in Atom Registrar. So we're doing a lot of automation, and now most of the sales that happen are delivered to the buyer in less than an hour. But with this instant transfer, we kind of clearly show that they will get the domain immediately if the domain is already in the Atom Registrar. And based on, again, early data, but it seems like it is giving us about 15 to 17% better conversion rates by having this instant transfer option, because buyers can now filter by domains that are instant transfer eligible. They can see this badge very clearly. And you may think that, why would that be? If I really want a domain, does it really matter whether it comes to me in an hour or a day? Or for the most part, that is valid, because, if you really, really want a domain, it may not affect your decision on how quickly that comes to you. That shouldn't really affect the conversion. But there's lots of buyers who are in that initial phase of discovering domains, and they're not really tied to one specific domain that they're coming in with. But if they see that out of the 5 domains that they're really, really interested in, one of them is instantly available, sometimes that can lead to, at least that's our assumption, a more favorable decision towards that. It's very similar to how e-commerce and checkout works in general. So we're testing some of these things that I think will be interesting.
I mean, I know GoDaddy, if you pay extra, they'll put the verified domain badge on it when someone searches for it at the domain registrar, and they've said that's given a lift. So if that gives a lift, any of those little symbols that increases people's confidence that they're going to get the domain or they're going to get it quickly, it makes sense to me that after seeing this data and what happened at GoDaddy and Afternic, it doesn't surprise me too much that helps. But I guess that leads to one of probably the biggest things going on at Atom, which is the domain name registrar. And I've registered a domain at Atom that I found through one of your other new features, which is the Domain Hunter. And it was a really easy process. The pricing seems good, in line, basically at cost. So tell me how this is going. What's the state of the registrar right now? What's the early feedback and where is it heading?
Yeah. So, this is one of those foundational things that we wanted to add to our ecosystem, because having a domain at registrar not only, allows for a much more efficient, faster, reliable transfers, but obviously, it's a missing piece that we had, being just a marketplace and not having the registrar stack limited some of our options to kind of offer a full service solution to our buyers. Overall, this has been extremely positive feedback so far. The registrar has been only live in public-facing front for a couple of months now, and the response has been very, very positive. The process is very smooth. Our pricing is more or less in line with kind of at cost, so it's not something that we are looking to make any money. In fact, being a registrar, I don't think any registrar is able to make any meaningful margin.
Domains are a loss leader,
Exactly.
Right?
But but we're not gonna. It's unlikely we're gonna go down the path of, hey, we're gonna do this race to the bottom and start offering prices where we are losing money. We will do that a little bit, but our goal really is to create value, and that's what we have been focusing on. How do we create value for sellers, for buyers who are listing domain or buying domains through our registrar? So there's a lot of features, options, benefits that we've been adding along with the registrar that create that value. So our focus has been around those aspects, and so far the response has been extremely, extremely great.
You get more domains in the ecosystem. I can see how that's positive for you as a seller. I know some of the hooks to get you in. If you have so many domains there, you get discounts on commissions and things like that. I think there was also something recently with, if you bring your own lead kind of discount and that sort of thing for domains that are in the Atom registrar, correct?
Yeah. So there is a Atom Edge program. So basically, if you have 100 domains in the registrar, you continue to get at cost pricing across all extensions. Plus, you save quite significantly on the commissions across all aspects of the marketplace. So premium listing, standard, plus, even in the bring your own lead, you pay as low as 2.5%. So, it does create quite a bit of benefit purely on the commission side, parking the domains here. And then obviously it gives some of those other opportunities, having those badges for instant transfer, faster payouts. So it does lead to a better overall experience for all parties involved.
I'm just on the site now because I'm looking for that comparables option, because I want to see what some of the comparables are, frankly, for my domains. And I see here the birthday sale, 25% off. I know that you did Black Friday sales kind of thing before. Does it really work? Like, I think of, we get back to the domains and everyone's like, if you really want the domain, you'll buy the domain. But is this having an impact?
Absolutely. We've done this a few times now. We do this typically 2 or 3 times a year. One is during the Black Friday, and then one typically around the early spring timeframe. And every time we have run this event, and typically this event is about 10 days long, we see at least 40 to 50% increase in our sales. Black Friday is even higher. We see in some cases buyers who are buying 20, 30 domains during these events, single individual buyers.
So investors.
Well, they more are buyers who are kind of collectors, is what they would like to call themselves. So they're like entrepreneurs.
So the small tech entrepreneur kind of
Right.
person, and
So they just like to kind of browse through these names, see what kind of makes sense, and hopefully buy that for a future project they may have in mind. So we see many of these buyers come back during these events and drive up some of these sales. One thing that is interesting is not only does this show a lift in the domains that are already discounted during these events, we also see that halo effect on the non-discounted domains. Very similar to a traditional retail Black Friday situation where, not only do people go to the stores to buy those crazy deals, but they end up buying products that are even not on sale during this time because they're just on the marketplace or on the store, and they just end up exploring and they fall in love with something that they decide to move forward. So most of these purchases are obviously discovery-led purchases where there is no imminent kind of need for that name. They don't have that specific name in mind when they're coming to the marketplace. But the fact that they are on sale and it's a limited style sale with a pretty meaningful discount, it does lead to a fairly high lift overall in the sales.
So you say they weren't necessarily keeping an eye on this domain, but you do have a feature, right, where people can track prices, and I assume you get alerted during this sale if it's
that is sale? A good point. Absolutely, yeah. So there's a track price feature which buyers can subscribe. So if they have a domain they're monitoring, they're watching, they can kind of start tracking price of that domain. And when the domain does go on a sale, or even if the domain is scheduled for a price increase, we notify the buyer and let them know that this domain is either on discount now or the price is going to go up in 30 days. This is your chance to kind of lock that price now.
Do you recommend when you get a lead to schedule a price increase?
Not immediately. However, if you've done the negotiation and if you kind of have a sense that the buyer is interested, but they're just holding their foot or they're just slowing, they're not as responsive, doing that price increase or scheduled price increase during that time can definitely help because you need that kind of little nudge and a little, deadline that buyers can see that just makes things a little bit more real. So that definitely helps during that process.
Okay. And one other thing, we're recording this right here at the tail end of March. The Domain Hunter tool, which has been live in beta for certain users, if you applied for it for, a couple months now, is now available to everyone. And just kind of super high level, what is Domain Hunter? So
it's basically an AI-led tool that helps people, mostly for domain investors. It helps them discover great domain names for acquisition from GoDaddy auctions, closeouts, Dynodot, even Atom Wholesale, Atom Auction. So it kind of is a tool that is continuously scanning these marketplaces and assessing which of these names might be investment worthy. And oftentimes, investors have keyword lists and they have certain keywords they are checking. But this tool is going beyond that. This is looking purely from a quality perspective. Is this a good, strong name, especially in the brandable sense that would make sense for investment? So it does surface a lot of opportunities that might otherwise get missed because they may not necessarily have the keywords that the buyers are tracking.
And one of the interesting things that's pretty cool about it is as you use it, you can select some keywords to add to the analysis. And it says these are high-selling keywords, right? High sell-through rate, which has given me a lot of tips on, hey, when I'm looking at domains, even if they aren't on Domain Hunter, is look for these keywords.
And we recently just expanded that to also start publishing these daily lists. So not only can you hunt for these names, now you can just simply scroll what our AI has determined to be, some interesting opportunities for acquisition. Also, Handrich, it publishes, daily list of.
Is that daily? Okay, I was wondering because by the time I got to it yesterday, basically everything was registered on that Handrich list. So.
We'll have to see how to kind of best share that. That definitely is a risk. We share about 50 to 100 of these every day, and my guess is within 30 minutes to an hour, most of them will be taken. So we'll probably have to play around with it. But yes, that's the goal, is to kind of share some of these opportunities with this tool.
All right. I want to close with something that kind of brings kind of full circle in the Adam's story. Started as Squad Help. And the big thing really then wasn't the domain marketplace, right? It was these naming contests. Find a name for your business. AI is, of course, changing how a lot of people are doing things. You made some announcements related to AI and naming contests. Help me understand at this point what the role of AI in that part of the business is and humans.
Yeah, so we've been, looking at how do we kind of adopt AI into this whole name brainstorming aspect that a lot of buyers love. Previously, as you mentioned, we started as a crowdsourcing platform. Companies could run naming competitions. They can still do that, which engages with our community of over 300,000 people who submit names into these contests. What we recently launched is a additional option, which basically allows for AI agents to compete with each other to come up with name ideas for a business. So we've trained these agents on different personas. Some agents think like, these two-word name combinations. Some agents think like coming up with abstract type of names. So many different styles. Some of them think about colors and animals. So the way it works is companies can provide a brief, and then our AI kind of spins off these agents, and they start recommending names. And as you kind of like certain name ideas, the agents come back, submit more names. One interesting thing that is part of this is, they're also constantly checking our premium inventory and suggesting names from our premium marketplace as well. So for the buyers, it gives them a full kind of picture of, what possibilities are there from a hand-rich perspective, but then oftentimes they see some better quality names from the premium marketplace and they end up going in that direction. So it's a low cost, option for buyers to try this out. And oftentimes, many of them end up upgrading these contests to also start including humans because, so we have the connection between, you can start with this AI naming contest for free. You can launch a contest, get some iteration. And now if you want even more ideas from actual people, you can upgrade that to a human contest. And then we continue down that path.
Interesting. All right. Well, lots of updates there, and I really appreciate how you bring lots of data to all these. Just kind of recapping here as far as Adam's revenue mix now, a little over a third is non.com domains, and about a quarter of overall revenue, right, from sales is .ai at this point, which is just, wow, thinking back just a few years on that. Payment plans continue to become more and more popular, and the average selling price is higher. Down payments also, you said more than half of payment plans now have a down payment. Is that right?
That is correct.
Yeah, I'm looking at the options here in my Adam account, and you can set, basically, you can set it, I guess, uniquely, but you can also just do a percentage. So I have it set to 15% of the selling price is requested as a down payment on those. And then you guys are seeing some early success with this kind of committed offers idea where people put down a down payment after making the offer to show they're serious. Instant transfer badge, which of course connects into the registrar. People who haven't checked out the registrar yet should go ahead and do that. And then, wow, just a lot of other stuff. I definitely recommend people check out Domain Hunter. Obviously, it's popular because the hand registration names are snapped up in a hurry. But let me ask one more question on the Domain Hunter. And this has always fascinated me about the domain industry. You're a competitor to GoDaddy, yet you're promoting their closeouts in their auctions. What's the thinking behind that?
I think there's two ways to build a business, right? One is you look at everybody as a competitor and you create this silo and create something where you're only sitting within your own silo and offering services. The way we look at it is, what's the best way to create value that leverages the strengths of the ecosystem and allows for both buyers and sellers to see that there is a place they can go to actually claim that value. So for us, the goal is about value creation. And clearly GoDaddy is massive in terms of their expired domains and closeouts and things like that. And for us to offer that ability to add another layer to discover the right opportunities there, I think it creates value for our sellers. And hopefully some of those sellers will, buy those domains and list them in our marketplace once they have acquired them. So I think it's more about what tools can we build to empower the sellers that make them better domain investors, given all the data and technology that we have built, so that we can kind of share that and create value for everyone.
All right. Well, Darpan, thanks so much for coming on the show today and sharing the latest updates.
Thanks, Andrew. It's always a pleasure.
My guest this week has been Darpan Munjal. He is the CEO of Adam. That's a wrap on this week's Domain Name Wire podcast. You can listen to all previous episodes at dnw.com/podcast or on your favorite podcast app. Thanks for listening.